Hey, tennis fans, you are listening to Match Point Canada, the official podcast of Tennis Canada. We're also members of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. I'm Ben Lewis, joined alongside Mike McIntyre, and we're also very happy to welcome on a longtime guest and friend of the podcast, Christopher Clarey. He's the author of The Master, and also nearing completion on The Warrior, Rafael Nadal and his Kingdom of Clay. It seems so fitting to have you on, Chris, as we talk about the impending retirement of Rafael Nadal. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, Ben, Mike, good to see you again.
Chris, you're becoming a real regular for us. I think you're getting up there in terms of all-time guest appearances. So keep it up. Maybe we'll go for 3 appearances next year. That could turn the tide for you.
Well, it's an honor every time. I appreciate your guys' passion for tennis, and always good to talk to the neighbors to the north.
Yeah, so I mean, just starting off, obviously, on this retirement, we know he's 38 years old, a 22-time Grand Slam champion. I think we all sensed it was winding down, but were you at all surprised, I guess, by the timing of Rafael Nadal's decision to retire with one final event coming up at the Davis Cup Finals?
Actually, I wasn't surprised. I mean, to be honest with you, I felt like the season in a lot of ways pointed to the Davis Cup for me. I mean, assuming he wasn't going to play to 2025, which became uncertain. I think after some of the results he had that he felt good about in the spring, and the fact that it didn't play out the way he would have liked. I think some of the farewell matches, and like he didn't get to do it in Monte Carlo, for example, didn't get to do it at Indian Wells. So I think that he has some regrets there. But I think when I saw the season at the start, it seemed like Davis Cup of Spain could go deep. And in Spain, with Malaga, being the host, and Alcaraz obviously being a huge factor now, it seemed like a pretty good spot for him to maybe call it quits. I know that was kind of what they were thinking, I think, at some point during the season too. But then a lot of things changed. So it's a hard process. I think a lot of folks thought Rafa would have a hard time saying goodbye to the sport because of his passion for competition and just how much he's pushed his body already through the years. So it was kind of, in some ways, a known quantity for him, what it's like to battle your body to keep going. But I think I'm not surprised. And ultimately, I think it's probably the best option he has available, assuming his body cooperates. I mean, I don't think he has the desire ultimately to go on and go through a whole other cycle next year. And I think this gives him a chance to have a, maybe not the ideal end, but a pretty fitting end.
Well, it's fitting for us to have you on for this episode, and you were the first choice that came to mind, given the fact that you're nearing completion on your book on Rafa, of course. And I mean, he's given so much for not just the sport and his fans, but to his country as well. And in that sense, I mean, aside from having Roland Garros as the ending point, which I think would be sort of that Cinderella picture perfect, like we would have loved to have seen Roger go out at Wimbledon, and, wasn't quite meant to be on his own terms, really, I guess. And for Rafa as a second choice, Davis Cup to me feels like the next best thing that I could suggest for him, given how proud he is to carry that Spanish flag.
Yeah, Mike, I think that's true. I mean, I think based on what he had available, I think this is a really great choice. You never know how his body's going to hold up. He's got the exhibition in Saudi coming up. Going to be playing some pretty good players there. Obviously, it's not going to be for points or anything. It'll be an exhibition, but you just never know how your body's going to react at this stage if you're Nadal. So hopefully he makes it to that final match, that final phase, and it'll be something. I mean, Rafa in Spain anywhere, Rafa playing, pétanque on a back court someplace, or padel or whatever it is, people want to watch him. And I think with the tennis and the build-up now with a month to go, there can't be a ticket left already, I wouldn't think, for that quarterfinal match against the Netherlands. And I think, ultimately, Roland Garros would be full circle, but this is kind of full circle too, really, because a lot of us we all knew about Nadal. Those of us covering tennis back in the early 2000s, we heard about him. It wasn't the same era that we're in now, so you didn't necessarily see YouTube of young prospects or get to watch them much. There wasn't the kind of blanket coverage that you have now. But we obviously had heard about him, and he basically emerged as a real star, I think, in Spain, and to some degree globally, but really, really in Spain at the 2004 Davis Cup final in Seville, which is not far from Malaga. It's just a couple hours drive, if that. And he basically was picked over Ferrero to play the first match against Andy Roddick. He was a teenager, and everybody knew he had greatness in him potentially, but they had not really seen it with their own eyes. And he showed them. That was just a vamos-filled amazingly passionate match, and Roddick was loaded for bear. Wanted to play his best tennis there. He was extremely motivated. Had been number one in the world not long before, Grand Slam champion, and Rafa just played lights out. And I remember watching the match. It was kind of chilly there. It was a little cold. You could see your breath. It was an indoor outdoor kind of vibe in the Seville Stadium, covered but not really covered. And the ball was moving pretty slowly, but he was just on fire. And you could just see big event, big moment, rise to it. So I think 20 years later, to go back to a similar region in Spain with Davis Cup, unfortunately not being what it used to be on a global level, although this will certainly give it a little boost. I think it's a good full circle moment, and I think a smart choice on his part.
I can only imagine what Roddick's reaction must have been like. He was already contending with Federer, and then, oh man, here's another one I got to deal with. And, you talk about a different era. It feels like we're moving into a different era in the sport, in the men's game. Roger's retired now 2 years later. Rafa's going to follow suit. Who knows how much longer we'll have Novak as the last remaining member of the big three. But how does it feel to you, this moment? And it felt similar when Sampras was hanging up the racket a little bit. Transition for the sport on the men's side, and how you feel sort of just in general with this passing of the torch from one generation to the Sinners and Alcarazes, who are now ready to carry forward and carry men's tennis forward with their efforts and accomplishments already.
Yeah, Mike, it's a huge signpost moment. Not really just in tennis. I'd say in sports, and to some degree even culturally, I think it is. I mean, I guess what you realize is how deep the connections become when players play this long and they play each other this often. Obviously, you can use the triangle, or you can go into other geometry if you like, but you want to add Andy Murray and Wawrinka, people like that, into the mix. But I mean, Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer have had their tribes, their camps, their matchups, their rivalries have been amazing. Look how close ultimately the head-to-heads will be. 31-29 for Novak over Rafa for 60 matches. Crazy. And I think people just got really connected to it, and it became part of the rhythm of life globally in some ways. Not everybody's as into tennis as some certain nations are, but I mean, you go almost anywhere on the planet and people would have heard of one of those guys or all three of those guys. And so it's a big thing, and it takes a long time to create that kind of history and attachment, and everybody kind of digging in and making it appointment viewing. You can sense the Sinner Alcaraz vibe is potentially similar.
It's off to a good start.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, they have to mature into their roles, but they match up really well. And so, but that's it's still very, very early, and what you realize is just what it takes, everything that has to go right and to some degree wrong for those 20 years of rivalries to take place. And you think back on it, I mean, Oregon-McEnroe, storied rivalry, they only played 14 times. Novak and Rafa played 60 times. You can go back to Laver and Rosewall in the barnstorming days. They played more than 100 times. Chrissy and Martina, obviously, but really in the modern men's game, this has no precedent. And I know I'm going to miss it for sure. And it was great because it wasn't just two guys. If it had been two, we might have gotten tired of it. But that there were three with some occasional infiltrators, that made it really, really special.
Yeah, pretty perfect era. And I think you hit the nail on the head. We're talking about Rafa, Roger, Novak as well. These are three global sporting icons. And, you read the tributes from some of these players like Tsitsipas and Rublev, and how they were watching the television when they were 5, 6, 7 years old, donning the Rafa gear and imagining the chance to play professional tennis. It's not often that you get these types of athletes that inspire a whole new wave of generations. And, you covered him for obviously a couple decades, and it's often brought up the type of sports person he was. Do you have any memorable interactions you might be thinking back to in your years covering Rafael Nadal?
Well, be honest, man, I'm not going to share everything because I want to save a little bit for my readers. There are a lot of good stories. I think all of us who've been around Rafa over the years at any capacity would have some memories about sort of his ability to empathize and his ability to make note of you, whatever role you played in the tennis microcosm. I think that's a special thing about him. He didn't really differentiate between superstars of his ilk or journalists or people running the transport or people doing the transcripts. I mean, he's somebody who noticed people and was, I think, raised to notice people and to see them and to make them feel seen, which I think is really a special thing. and I'll save my one big anecdote for the book, but I feel like it's ultimately that's a really, really hard thing to do in a world where you're being catered to 24/7 for 20 years, to be able to continue to, behave well. In some ways, it's a normal way to behave for you or for me. But when you're in that situation where you are being constantly treated as if you're God's gift, it's very not so easy to keep your feet on the clay or your feet on the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. Rafa, after Roger retired, memorably said he felt like a part of him was leaving as well. And it makes me think of, what does this retirement now mean for Novak Djokovic? Obviously, he's in his late 30s as well, but we just saw him compete in the finals of the Shanghai Masters and win an Olympic gold medal just this year. And still, he's, of course, playing tennis at an exceptionally high level. Do you wonder if, seeing Roger go, now seeing Rafa hang it up, his greatest rival, will that potentially accelerate his timeline at all, or offer him some reflections of how long he wants to keep pushing?
Yeah, I was thinking that. I watched the replay of the match, and obviously a little tough for those of us on the East Coast to watch it live, but against Sinner. But I was thinking the same thing. I mean, Rafa's not quite gone, so it's not quite a big one yet, but it's essentially, symbolically, it is. But I don't know. I mean, I guess I covered Agassi and Sampras. Didn't quite get the same sort of ending because Pete basically never played again after winning the U.S. Open, but he didn't retire either. He didn't announce his retirement for another year, so we didn't know right away that it was going to be this amazing walk-off homer situation. Long delay. But then look at Andre. I mean, Andre played on after Pete stopped. He was his yin and yang, and he played on quite a long time as well. And he got the meaning out of what he's able to do with his brand and his school, and also with facing off against the new generation, which was, Federer and Nadal at that time. So I think it's not a given that Novak will feel aimless after this, but he's at a different stage. Andre was early 30s when Pete stopped, and, Novak's late 30s now. I can't imagine that he's going to have a few more years in him. I don't think he's going to just physically be able to hold up and compete with these young guys for that much longer. But he's always had that ability to adapt. He searches for adaptation. He likes new challenges, something he seeks out. So I think it takes a little while for that one to settle. But I do think that, he's a part-time player, which is what he seems like he wants to be. And I totally get that. I don't think part-time is going to cut it against Sinner and Alcaraz in big matches. I think you're going to have to be pretty full-time.
I hope Novak gives you a few years after you finish the Rafa book before you got to start thinking about writing his. So hopefully he won't rush that one.
I think everybody's going to need a break, from my writing after that, for sure.
Hey, we love your writing and thoroughly enjoyed the Federer book, The Master, and love the little Match Point Canada snippet that was in there that was unexpected. So thanks again for that. But how's the writing process on this book after going through a similar sort of process, focusing on one of the all-time legends with that Federer book? Did it make it any easier this time? Did it feel like a similar process to you, or was it its own unique sort of experience?
Well, I think what I learned from the first one, is basically that, I think I might have said this to you guys a couple of years ago, but structure is king when you're writing a book. It's important when you're writing a newspaper article or writing anything, really, but it's really, really important when you're writing a book, because if you don't have your structure in place and you're trying to piece together a long narrative, it's going to fall apart somewhere. It's going to lose momentum. You're going to lose the readers. So that's really important, I think, to really work your way through it before you start to write. And that was something that I really did this time from the experience of the first. And it's not a classic biography. The Federer book was a little different structure because of the way it was designed around locations. It was where the places that mattered to him, the places where I'd interviewed him, the places where he really had the deepest connections. This one's structured differently, and not always in a classic fashion. So that's been fun, but also challenging. So it wasn't like I was copying and pasting one system to the next. But I like that. I think that makes it fresh all around for a writer to have a new challenge to try to overcome in the structural phase. And then just the writing of it in general. I mean, it's sort of interesting because the Federer book they're so connected, but the Federer book was sort of tried to do it through his prism, and now the Nadal book is through Nadal's prism. And I was a little worried there'd be too much overlap, but actually there really isn't. It's interesting, and to try to look at how Rafa sort of saw events, how people viewed Rafa at these moments instead of how people viewed Federer. So it's kind of changing the chip, but enough that I think it keeps it fresh. Hopefully for the reader, I know it has for me.
Well, we're looking forward to it, and hey, hopefully you leave the Canadian athletes for us to tackle one day, and something that I don't know, Ben. Would you ever? I'd be down to write a book one day about a Canadian tennis player, I think, or the Canadian tennis rise, over the last 10, 15 years too.
Yeah. Maybe not on a singular athlete, but as you said, something bigger, like exactly the rise of Canadian tennis, which can be documented the last kind of 10, 15 years.
And speaking of Canadian tennis, Chris, a win from Spain in Davis Cup coupled with a win from Canada, and the two nations would be facing each other, which would be pretty cool for Denis Shapovalov, Gabriel Diallo, and maybe Milos Raonic. The Canadian squad now is going to be going into battle without Felix Auger-Aliassime. So I'm just curious, when you look at the Canadian contingent here at Davis Cup, especially with Felix missing, how do you sort of assess perhaps their chances or how they fit into the mix of the final eight teams?
Oh, I mean, Felix is so good indoors, isn't he? I mean, he's had such great success there. So that definitely helps the nostalgia crowd with a Nadal and Alcaraz there on the Spanish side for sure. Denis has obviously, played. He played in that Davis Cup last time Rafa played it in Spain in 2019. It was a kind of a hybrid sort of match played, in Madrid when they started out the new format and everything. So I think, he's definitely had that experience before of playing Rafa in that sort of setting in a Davis Cup format. But this is going to be something off the charts, I think, just in terms of if the Spanish are able to win that quarterfinal match and the Canadians win, it'll be off the charts just in terms of the volume and the atmosphere and all that. So it'll probably be unlike, I guess, vintage Davis Cup. Probably not too far from what it's going to be like there. This might have a little extra to it because of the occasion, obviously. But vintage Davis Cup and those big finals on the road, that's some of the loudest things I've ever experienced covering sports, and I've covered a lot of different ones. I mean, I remember the 1991 final against in Lyon, France and Forget and Lecomte, captained by Yannick Noah, against the U.S. with Sampras and Agassi. That was just, you felt like the entire arena in Lyon was going to go into orbit. And then also I remember Mar del Plata, Argentina, Del Potro and Nalbandian playing the Spanish without Nadal. I think that was 2010, I want to say. Again, just incredibly loud. The whole arena was just vibrating. So I think it'll be more than just a tennis match for sure if the Canadians get there, and I think they'll definitely be the underdogs.
Just a quick follow-up on Felix Auger-Aliassime before I ask another Rafa question. I don't know if you feel like he's at a bit of a crossroads right now, career-wise. We've seen a lot of peaks and valleys. 2022, you mentioned, obviously he's great indoors and had a huge surge at the end of that season, got to world number 6. This season did win a bronze medal in doubles, was 4th place at the Olympics, and now sort of the struggles mount again with an early exit at the U.S. Open and couple struggles here in the Asian swing. Do you feel like there's a bit of burnout involved, or what do you see, I guess, when you watch Auger-Aliassime, who talent-wise seems like he should be someone who is in the top 10?
Yeah, I think maybe just as a smidgen of baseline consistency that hurts him, for sure. I feel like he gets a little mechanical sometimes and doesn't necessarily isn't able to sustain level from the baseline that he needs. And the consistency to keep up with the very best players in the world consistently. But obviously, if he has a great serving day and everything's flowing from that, he can beat anybody. I mean, also, he's one of only, I think, 3 guys ever to go 5 sets with Nadal at Roland Garros. So that's a good club to be in as well. So he can play at anything. I always felt when I was watching him as a young player that potentially grass would be his best surface, just based on the weapons that he had and his athleticism and just his general way of playing all-court tennis. But ultimately, to me, it's a bit mystifying. I'm sure you guys know more than I do watching him week to week. I'm surprised he hasn't made more of a big impact on the tour consistently. Obviously, injuries have been a big factor in the last 2 or 3 years when he might have really emerged and done well. But injuries and managing them and understanding how to avoid them is a huge part of men's tennis at this stage of the game. So you have to really be able to control that, to be able to put yourself in the elite group and show up week to week. But I feel like he's just not far. I feel like he hasn't been far for quite a while now. There's no doubt that the other players really respect his ability and are definitely wary of him, which is a good thing. But he hasn't been able to get a consistent chunk of achievement, really. He's shown flashes in Australia. He's shown flashes in France. He's shown flashes at Wimbledon.
Yeah.
Shown flashes, obviously, on the hard courts and other places, too. So it's just a matter of, I think, getting a healthy 6 to 7 months and the right game plans. And even then, the level is just so high.
It is.
Or now you watch a guy like Mensik play, or a guy like Ben Shelton, and you see what's coming down the road here in men's tennis. There's got to be a lot of guys with big serves and big games that are just as good athletically as Felix. So he's going to have to find a way to upgrade, I think, the ground stroke consistency and above all, stay healthy.
On Davis Cup, obviously, Roger Federer retired with the Laver Cup and did get one final match there in doubles. But in terms of stakes, there weren't really any stakes to that match. It was just sort of that special monumental moment sharing the court with Rafael Nadal. I wonder, what type of role could you see Rafa playing here at the Davis Cup finals, where obviously there is a lot at stake in terms of an international event? Is there a chance he is competing in meaningful matches, or is he more likely to be sort of watching from the sidelines?
From what I understand, I mean, I haven't talked to Federer myself, but I've read all his interviews religiously, and he says that if Rafa's in good form and healthy and as eager as he is now, he sees him as a potential singles player as well. And honestly, looking at the matchups in the lineup, Spain doesn't have an obvious, just clear-cut second singles player. Bautista and I think it's Pablo Carreño. They are the guys who have had amazing seasons. So, and Rafa, inspired by that moment, with Alcaraz hopefully carrying the team in the first singles spot, I could see him play singles and doubles both. Yeah, certainly. Maybe just singles and not doubles, depending how it goes in that match if he plays. But I think people would like to see him play singles in the Spanish team, and I think he would like to play singles too, given a choice. But he'll do whatever. I know Rafa's not going to go out with the big ego and imposing any kind of requirements, but looking at his level at times this season, he gets a chance to play some meaningful tennis before he gets there. I could see him being competitive in a singles match. What do you guys think?
Well, I think they better put him out there in some role. Otherwise, that crowd's going to revolt if they show up and don't get to see him play. He's got to play.
So, for sure, he's playing something. We know that.
Yes. Yeah.
And as you mentioned, compared to Carreño Busta or RBA, who neither of whom are what they used to be, why wouldn't you put Rafa in over either of them? It's not like they have, like you said, a go-to number 2 player right now. I think of the crowds that are not going to get to say goodbye to Rafa, much like I thought about Federer's retirement and all the places that would have loved to have had a proper farewell with him. Do you think that a future Federer-Nadal exhibition series or tour would be something that those players might consider, or that they're more likely perhaps to just leave it with their professional playing days and just leave it at that?
I would be shocked if we don't see quite a few. I mean, now that Roger's shown he can do it, I mean, he played a bit in Shanghai, right? So I think there had been concern that Roger would be able to, with his knee issues, really be able to even sustain an exhibition match in singles and do something. Looks like he's been able to, and I know that's something they both want to do and are planning on doing for their foundations, for whatever. There's obviously a lot of talk. There has been a lot of talk of breaking the record that they set, in Cape Town in the match pre-pandemic when they played the exhibition down there, 50,000 plus. And Santiago Bernabeu in Madrid was supposed to be that match and hasn't happened yet for a bunch of reasons, but I could see them trying to pull it off at some point for sure.
Sure, hope so.
And I think
selfishly, I'd love to see it myself. Yeah. I know tennis fans would go crazy for that.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's great, but I do think, to your point, Mike, I do think, Rafa didn't get to say farewell. Officially, he wasn't ready to say he was going to retire at the French Open this last year or at the Italian Open. He was pretty clear on Madrid, paying him back for the blue clay back in the day, right? But he was clear on that one. But I do think that he's going to have several ceremonies at these places where he didn't get to say goodbye with a racket in his hand. So I think there'll be a big thing, a big shindig at the French Open next year, and I'm sure there'll be a big shindig in Rome if he's interested in going there for that as well. So there will be that sense of ceremony. He just won't be playing.
Got to get him to Toronto or Montreal too, I guess, eh, Ben?
Yeah.
He's absolutely. 5-time winner here, 5-time winner in Canada.
Ben, I'll let you.
He's won him too. Yeah.
I'll let you close things out here, Ben. Go ahead.
Yeah, just I mean, reflecting on the career and 22 Grand Slams, 92 titles. Is there any match or accomplishment that maybe stands out to you, Chris, above any of the others? And obviously, I mean, it's hard to choose.
It is hard to choose, especially when you've been sort of deep in the weeds of them all and watched so many of them, like I have in the last few months. Again, I guess I'd pick two for different reasons. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to talk about the 2008 Wimbledon final. That was an amazing match. Everybody knows that. I think that's going to be the one that will probably, in some ways, stand the test of time. But I feel like the 2012 Australian Open final against Djokovic, almost 6 hours. Rafa had lost 6 or 7 times in a row to Novak at that point. Was really up against it playing him. Starting a new season, had made some changes to his game and to his equipment to try to counter that. He ended up losing that match, but just the level of effort, self-belief, grit, and ultimately not to come up with the win, the way he handled that. And yet I think he came out of that match very optimistic about the future because he had pushed Novak so far after having been basically destroyed a couple of times in the season before, even on clay. So I think that match was really indicative of what he was able to bring out of himself when he really, really wanted to and really needed to. And I think it did turn his career around in some ways, even though he lost it. And then the other match is also in Australia, which is, I think, the 22 final against Medvedev. His most surprising, Grand Slam title. You could argue the last French Open was too, because he had his foot shot up with painkillers and he was basically walking on one foot. But I mean, that was the French Open. Australia, that was a shot nobody saw coming. And I think he was just operating on his pure competitive instincts and worked his way into form and rallied from 2 sets down. And it was a beautiful thing to see. And ultimately, I think that'll be one of the very few matches when he thinks back 20 years from now, he'll remember that moment very well.
That Wimbledon one, Ben, for me definitely is the one that comes to mind because of how much was on the line and beating Federer there on grass for the first time. But if I take it down a notch from the slams, 2005 in Montreal when he played Agassi in the final. And there was so much talk at the beginning of that tournament about, is he just a clay court guy? From a lot of media members that maybe hadn't seen him play as much or seen him play on hard court. And it was still kind of in the infancy of his pro career. And he ends up against, the all-time hard court legend who was still active at the time there in Agassi and beating him there. And sure, there was a ton of years between the two. Agassi was 35, I believe, at the time. But it really showed people, hey, watch out for this kid. He's not just a one-trick pony.
Yeah, I remember Brad Gilbert saying that afterward, too. Who had worked with Agassi, and he was saying that was when I knew he was going to be an all-court champion, just the way he handled that match. Andre knew it, too. And then a year before then, you remember, first time he played Federer in singles, Miami.
Yeah.
Roger was number 1 in the world. Rafa was really unknown then. That was pre-Davis Cup final and all that stuff. And he beat him. And he just looked like he was able to handle the pace and move on the hard court too. So, yeah, definitely early signs of what was to come.
Yeah, Mike, I'm sure we'll cover more moments. I'll just reference that 2013 summer that he had where he was absolutely on fire. And of course, won Canada, Cincinnati, back-to-back leading into the U.S. Open, where he defeated Novak Djokovic in the final there in 4 sets, his last ever win on hard courts against Novak. And I remember him falling to the court sobbing. And just an incredible moment there in that third set where I think he was serving 4-all love 40. And to me, that was one of the most clutch holds of serve I think I've ever seen. Digging out of love 40 4-all, which was the pivotal moment of the match, and then broke Djokovic in the following game. And that turned the tide and obviously won the match for Rafael Nadal, one of his 4 U.S. Open titles. So I'll pick that one as a special moment there.
So many to choose from. Chris, thanks for joining us and reminiscing about Rafa's career and giving us a little bit of insight into your book. We're so looking forward to that, and we'll definitely have to have you back on when that drops to discuss more specifically. But thank you so much. Have a great end to the 2024 season, both on and off the court. And we look forward to having you back again in the future.
Thanks so much, guys. It's always a pleasure. And yeah, it's been quite a run, huh? Quite a 20 years of men's tennis for sure.